Whilst the United States is and has been the driving force behind the so-called war on drugs, the United Nations is the body engaged in administration of the strategy, with the International Narcotics Control Board monitoring compliance with the 3 drug control treaties. The treaties are the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961 as amended by the 1972 Protocol, the Convention on Psychotropic Substances 1971, and the United Nations Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances of 1988. The treaties mandate 4 international bodies, which are the World Health Organization, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is the policy-making body of the United Nations in relation to drug-related matters and also functions as the governing body of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and the International Narcotics Control Board, with the Secretary-General of the United Nations being represented by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. As discussed in my book, the only way the so-called war on drugs could be a strategy to prevent and minimise drug-related harm is the inclusion of the drugs alcohol, tobacco and caffeine in the policy. The regime is purely an intentional crime creation and maintenance scheme utilising people who associate with drugs other than alcohol, tobacco and caffeine as a resource to be exploited for the purposes of political advantage and economic gain. Accordingly, the United Nations presides over a global system of intentionally created crime, whilst using the justification of addressing what it calls the world drug problem. However, the world drug problem is obviously a self-serving and wholly deceptive concept, as it does not involve supply and use of the 2 most dangerous drugs in existence, alcohol and tobacco, and caffeine. Although it might be challenging for people to think in terms of the United Nations administering a global system of intentionally created crime, which also constitutes a worldwide human rights abuse, this is the unfortunate reality. A huge bureaucracy within the UN has the task of administering and enforcing a worldwide system of intentionally created crime, which involves widespread human rights abuses such as mass incarceration. While the UN gives indications it is concerned about human rights, it is obvious that they are steadfast in their resolve to keep the supply and use of drugs other than alcohol, tobacco and caffeine illegal, thereby keeping the black market in place as well as the global system of intentionally created crime which sustains enforcement organisations and the prison industry, for example. The United Nations is generally perceived as an organisation working for the good of humanity, but the reality is that it is an integral part of a worldwide human rights abuse, which takes the form of a global web of intentionally created crime involving mass incarceration, oppression, murder and wars, amongst other atrocities.